Today we're going to do another quilt tutorial and I'm so excited for this one. This quilt tutorial is using that basic log cabin block, so it's so great for those that are, you know, beginner friendly, but it will be a spectacular quilt. The quilt that I'm making today is, hold on a second, I'll just pop that up here, is this one here. So that's just the mud map that I have put together on electric quilt. It is a super cute quilt. It uses a fat quarter bundle. I've used Camille Roskelley's Lighthearted fat quarter bundle for this because it's got a lovely balance between the lights and the darks. Because as you'll see, I've marked quite a lot on here. So as I was going through, I was marking which ones I'd completed because there are variations between the different ones to give it that shadowing heart effect, which is really good. But what we'll do first is we're going to go through creating the log cabin block, and I know this is a very common block. We all love this block, well, at least I love this block. But what we're going to do is go through creating that log cabin block. Then we're going to put it all out on the floor, and apologies in advance, I'm sharing the room where I normally lay my quilts out with my son. He's an apprentice electrician and he's doing some, you know, he's making something. I'm not really sure what it is. But then we're going to lay that out and then we're going to start piecing that together. So we're just going to go through that journey together. But this is a wonderful quilt. It's a big quilt and I think you'll thoroughly enjoy making this one, especially if you love making a log cabin block and you want to do something a little bit different with your quilt. This one here also, I think you could use up your scraps. Grab those scraps out. As long as you've got some dimension between your colours as you shadow it out, I think this would be the perfect quilt to use up those scraps. Let's have a look and let's get started. Okay, so just getting started. Once again, let's just have a quick look. So you'll see we've got the nice, the darker red in the middle, and then we blend it out using those pink tones, then the more the aqua tones, and then the green on the outside. So I think it's a really nice balance, and I think you can do this with your scraps, absolutely. You just need a really good balance between your lights and darks in your fabric. So with this one, you need a large number, and I can't even remember exactly, but I will put it up on the screen, of log cabin blocks. I have gone ahead and created all the rest of the log cabin blocks, but this is exactly what it will look like. So this is one where we've got that pink and then those lighter shades on the other side so that we can get that, you know, that heart shadow effect. What I've done is each time I've counted up and I know exactly how many of each log cabins that I need of each variety, and then I'm just pinning them together with, you know, one of those, you know, clamp things, and then that's how I've got all of these. Now, I know a lot of people sort of think about the log cabin and go, well, like these are all straight, perfect. My recommendation is absolutely square up every single block, and you'll notice that I'm going to square up throughout this quilt tutorial. The reason for that is I use a scant 1/4 inch foot with my JUKI, and that gives me a lot of extra, it gives me the opportunity to cut down. So what I'm going to do is we're going to pop these aside, and we do get quite a stack here, but keeping them in order of keeping them in this sort of order with these clips on it does allow us, when we're starting to place it down on the floor and build out this quilt, it will make it so much easier. So if you've got these or something similar, definitely go ahead and use them while you're creating it. Okay, so what will you need for your log cabin block? So I should have gone ahead and made this a little bit easier, but I haven't. Sometimes that's the way, right? We think we're all prepared and we really are not. So what you'll need is you'll need 2 2.5 inch squares. So for this one here where I'm doing a light and dark combination, then you'll need 2 4.5 by 2.5 inch. That's for the next round. Then you'll need 2 6.5 by 2.5, then 2 8.5 by 2.5, 2 10.5 by 2.5, and then you'll just need 1 at 12.5 by 2.5. Now our block should finish 12.5-inch square. So what I would recommend is before you start piecing it together, to make sure that all your blocks are 12.5-inch square, and just trim off what's there. It may not be much, but this is what I've trimmed off of. Oh, let me just pull this in. This is what I've trimmed off of all of those blocks there. And you know, I know it's not much, but it certainly will make a difference when you're piecing that quilt together. And it's the difference between when you're putting it when you're sandwiching it all together, it may make a difference with how well it quilts. So I would highly recommend you go through the process, trim off those little excess pieces and square up those blocks. It'll certainly pay off in the end, and it doesn't really take that long to do it either. So we're going to go over to the machine. Now what you will notice is when I get to certain squares, I will actually square up as I go. Because I am using that scant 1/4 inch, it does grow and it does make it a little bit out of balance quite quickly. So let's head over to the machine and let's start putting this together. Okay, so this is the block that we're going to create. So we've got that dark green and going into the light. So that's why we've only got one of the 12.5 by 2.5, because that's going to be our last piece that we put on, and that's up here. So let's go ahead and we're going to start putting this together. So I'll turn on my machine for the day. I use the JUKI TL2010Q. I use a Rassant thread, and I'm certainly running out, so I definitely need to get some more. My machine gets very dusty, but it has been oiled last night in preparation for today, so she is all ready to go. I use a stitch length of about 1.3. I find that stitch length for me is best. It does take a little bit more to unpick, but I'm okay with that. And I use the scant 1/4 inch foot. You can also use the 1/4 inch foot, which you can get with the JUKI, and that's this one here. I'm not sure if you can see that, but that's this foot here. I tend not to use that because I always like to trim down my blocks, but certainly go ahead. But I find that always, that particular foot, it comes up a little bit short, and that's really not what I'm aiming to do. So let's pop the first two. So we're going to get our first two pieces, which is the 2.5 by 2.5. Piece those together. So we go right sides together, and just traveling along that edge, we're just going to put down there. And that is your first piece, all placed together. Now, people all do different things here. You can go ahead and put the next piece on, and because you've finger pressed it down, you may have a roller, you can roll it down, or you might head to your iron after each one. I tend to head to my iron. I love a nice flat surface to work on when I place the next one on. So I'm going to head to my iron and I'll be back. Okay, so I've been to the iron, I've pressed that, and I press to one side. I generally try and go to the dark side if I can. And then we're going to now add on our next piece. Now I don't use pins on this type of quilt, like the log cabin block, because I feel like we can manage it. So right sides together, 1/4 inch from that edge, and down we go. And then finger press that open, and then you can go ahead and add that next one on. And well, because we're having a dark side and a light side, you want to make sure, and these are going to be exactly the same, but that's okay. There is no right or wrong answer with this quilt. If you're using the same fabric twice that sits next to each other, you'll notice in my quilt I've done that so many times. At the end it's all going to look amazing. So I'm going to go ahead, add this on, and I'll come back to you when I'm going to square up, because I will square up shortly. All right, so I thought I'd just pop back for a moment. So I've pieced that one on. Now, the best way to think about this when you're doing a log cabin is always look for where you have three pieces, and you're always going to join on your next piece where you have the three. So we're not going to join it on where we have the two, because that probably won't look that great, and you will definitely need to unpick. So you want to come across here, and it's where you have the three. Now, because we're going for the dark on one side and the light on the other, we're going to pick up a light piece. This one is a white on white, so you want to make sure that you have the right side facing down. And we're going to go ahead and stitch this one up. And this is a point where I will square up my block. So we're going to head back to the cutting table, and we're going to square this block up. And you'll notice that there will be a little bit of excess there that we're going to take off. Okay, so we have our block, and we are, this is 6.5 by 6.5 at the moment. So I've grabbed this Q Cuts ruler, which is 6.5 by 6.5. I'm just going to place that on the top. Now, what I do is I look at that middle square, and I lined that 2 inch by 2 inch up with that middle, with the lines of that square, and then that's how I know where the middle is, and to keep that nice and center. Then I just go around and I trim off that excess, and you can see there it's not much, but there's definitely enough there for you to trim off. Then I just turn it around and trim off the next one, and so that just helps us to keep that block square. I do this as I go, only because I like to have nice square blocks, or as square as I can get them, because I'm not a perfect sewer. But our next step that we're going to do, again, we've got the 3, and I'm going to go ahead and add that one, add our 6.5 by 2.5 on, right sides together. With that one on, we're going to now take another dark one, because we want to make sure we go where there's 3, and we're going to place that there, right sides together again, and stitch from one end to the other. Okay, we've popped that one on. We're now at 8.5 by 8.5, so I now grab out a bigger ruler, and I just pop that there. So again, I use the lines on the ruler to match up with my sew lines. That way I know that I'm getting it nice and accurate. And then I just trim off that excess, and then turn it around. Just pop that in, and just checking here that that's going to be 8.5 by 8.5, which is beautiful. Pop those threads to the side, and we are ready to go again. So we've got the 3 pieces here. We're going to grab our next white piece, and whoa, what do you know? I have now 3 of them in a row. As I said, it's not going to matter. You can do whatever, and this is why it's so good to be able to use your scraps with log cabin blocks. Right sides together, and let's stitch that one up. Okay, with that one on there, we now want to go to another white piece, and this one here is the white on white again. So we're going to again go right sides together and stitch that up. At the end of this one, we are going to square up again. All right, so we should be at 8.5 by 8.5 now. So again, let's pull that ruler in and line that up with our sew lines. That's the easiest way to do it. That way we know we're going in the right direction. And just looking down, I can see that everything's starting to look really good. And we're just taking off that little bit of excess there, popping that around, and line up the other side. If you've got one of those Lazy Susan type cutting mats, then that would be absolutely perfect for this. Now what I would do if I'm making a whole heap, I'd chain piece, get them all a block of section together, and then I would trim them all down at once rather than one at a time. But when I start a new quilt, I always make the first block and then go ahead and make multiple blocks after that, because you just want to make sure that you've got everything in the right position and that you're really happy with that block before you go ahead and make all the blocks and then realize, oh my God, I've made a mistake. Sometimes it's great to step away from the block, have a bit of a look at it, or take a photo. And generally you can see things in a photo that you can't see when you're looking at it. It's amazing what a photo can do. We're going to now add that next one on. So we're now at the 10.5 by 2.5, and we're just going to add that one on, and let's stitch it up. We are down to our last strip, so we're going to go ahead, right sides together again where we have the 3, and make sure, one thing that I didn't mention at the start is I always look to make sure I have a perfect right angle at the top and at the bottom. If you don't, it will skew your block. And look, none of my blocks are perfect, but I certainly try to make sure I have these basic things in place, which will then help me to get it nice and as straight as I possibly can. Let's stitch this one up, and then we're going to come back and do the last lot of squaring up before we start piecing this one together. Okay, so that's our finished block, and we can see we've got half of it is in the light fabric and then half is in the darker fabric. So that gives us that lovely dimension as we're shadowing out that that heart. So we're going to grab a 12.5 by 12.5 ruler and pop that on the top there and have that nice and square. Pop a little bit of pressure onto the ruler itself and work your way around. Remove what excess is there, turn the block, and let us do the same here. And got a little bit here that we're going to take off, but you can hear where we're taking it off. There's a tiny bit, but it's not a lot to take off. So they are fairly accurate, but like I say, I prefer to do those checks and balances and make sure we have them square before we go ahead. So this is one of the previous blocks, and then that's the one that we've made today. So I'm going to take us now to my other room that I'm sharing with my son. So please forgive the mess because he's definitely got all his electrical gear in there, and I'll just try and work around it as best I can. But we are going to go ahead and place this down on the floor so that we can then start to pile up those rows. So let's get started. Okay, so I have all of the quilt blocks and I've got my pattern with my mud mat from Electric Quilt. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to put them out on the floor. And like I said, apologies for the mess, I'm working around my son. But I'm going to give you a bit of an idea of what it looks like to place all of these together. I tend to like to lay it out on the floor, make sure I'm happy with the arrangement, and then go ahead and start piecing it together. So let's try and at least get the first row together, and then I'll have a go at doing it myself, and then we can come back together and have a bit of a look at what I've done. All right, let's get started. Okay, so I've got the first lot and I've just taken the little clip off. And we're going to start putting them down. Now, what you do need to know, if you are going to follow this mud map, you need to have a look at how these all go together, because if you are putting these, oops, let's just bring that down there. Start again. If you're putting these in, you want to make sure that they are going around the right way, or it will start to become a little bit unmanageable. So that one there, we just have to go and grab an all light one. Might have forgotten to bring some. That's all right. We'll just skip that one for now. And then we want that one to go that way. This one is going to go that way. So you can start to see that we're putting these all together, and then we're going to keep going. So I might just go ahead and do that because it is a little bit hard to see, but you get the general idea that we've just got to start pulling these together. So let me go ahead, piece these together, place these all on the floor, and I'm going to come back to you once I've got them all placed. Okay, so I have, oops, let's just get that in the frame. I've popped the quilt pieces all on the floor, and so that's all sitting on the floor now. It's a bit hard to see, I'm sorry, but you'll get the general idea. It's a very big quilt. It's 98 by 98, so it fills this floor, and with all the extra electrical, it's also very hard. But something you'll notice, let me just see if I can turn this around a little bit. Up in this top corner, you'll see I have a gap. I need to go and make 2 more log cabins because I am short. I do have extra fabric, so that's okay. There's not a lot extra, but there was definitely extra of that light pink. So I'm going to go ahead and make those before we start piecing the first row together. But it certainly looks good. I'm going to insert a picture. I think that might be a little bit easier to see of what it looks like, but it certainly, I think it looks lovely. And let's just see how we go. All right, let me go and create those 2 extra log cabin blocks. Okay, so I popped those last 2 in that I've just gone back and made. So at this point, what I would normally do is I'd actually take a photo of the quilt and make sure I've got all the placement, because I find that when I'm looking at it like this, it looks stunning. I think I've done an incredible job. But then when I take a photo, I realise where I've made a mistake, and I can already see a mistake with my placement up the top of the shadowed lighter heart. I've got one of the pieces around the wrong way, so I'll definitely fix that one. So I just go ahead, take a photo, which I've just done, and I'll pop that up here for you to have a look at. The sun is shining in here. We're just coming into summer in Australia, so it is a little bit warmer outside, and it's certainly shaping up to be a lovely day. So what I'm going to do now is, I know that piece at the top I'll need to correct, but in terms of this bottom row, I'm really happy with how that is. So what I do is I just let me pop my phone in my pocket. So what I do is I collect from one side to the other. So I'm just going to hop in front of the camera. Unfortunately, there's probably no graceful way of doing this. And then I just pick them up one at a time as I go along. Not the most graceful, but certainly a method. And then I take, oops, I've got a bike there. I then grab these here, and I'll take them back to the sewing table, and we'll place them so that we can start sewing them together. So let's head back to the sewing table. Okay, so we have our bottom row here. I've also got the mud map here ready to go. So I'll have the mud map in front of me, and then I'll just place these out along my row here. Now it's going to be too short because this, like we've said, is a very, very big quilt. So I'll just pop a couple out, and then we'll just keep gradually. But I always keep them in this order as I pick them up, and then put them back out so that I know that I'm not getting any mixed up. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm going to piece this particular row together one at a time, and then I'll come back to you once I've finished this row. And then we'll get on with all the other rows. So it's starting to come together, and it's starting to look absolutely stunning. I'm in love with it. So let's see how we go. Okay, so I've pieced that first row together. So a couple of little pointers when you're piecing your blocks together is always make sure that when you're placing 2 blocks right sides together, that you keep them at the right angle, because if you don't keep them at that right angle, or you don't look at that, you may start to skew your quilt, and we certainly don't want that, because look, we're making a fabulous quilt. So let's make it as accurate as possible. But that's a tip that I would recommend, is always just check right sides, especially if you're not pinning, which I'm not. But this is our first row, so let's just drag this one along. Now, the other thing that you need to remember as you're sewing them all together is that when you're ironing, you want to make sure one row you iron to one side and the next row you iron to the other side. Otherwise, when we start to piece the rows together, got a little bit of water there, you will, oh, a few threads there, you will notice that you'll notice that the seams are all going in the same direction, and then you'll need to fix one up so that you can nest those seams, because the best way of doing this and to get the most accurate points is by, from my viewpoint, is by nesting those seams. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place, pin and sew. I'm not going to pin. Who am I kidding? I'm not going to pin. I'm going to complete each of these rows. I'm going to sew each of the rows together, and then I'm going to show you how I nest and put two rows together as we're, creating our quilt. So it's time for us now to go ahead and piece up each row. So let's go. Okay, so that's all the rows pieced together. So just a little tip that I do, and you'll see there's fold marks in here. So as I'm progressing up and I'm looking at each row as I'm sewing it together, just to make sure I've got it right, because the last thing you want to do is piece the entire quilt together and then realize one of your log cabins is not facing the right direction, and you've got the lights where the dark should be and vice versa. So what I do is I actually just continually just keep folding the page so that I know that I'm not getting confused between other lines and the line that I'm working on. So I just make sure that that's at the bottom and I'm following that one, and then as I'm going up I'll do the same thing until it becomes easier, because going through this middle section sometimes you can get a little bit confused, but maybe that's just me too. All right, so the next step we're going to do is we're going to piece these two together, and what I'm going to do is I've got these, just shift these over. So these are our bottom two rows that we're going to piece together first. So what I do is I'm just doing a bit of a quick check and a glance just to make sure that I have everything going in exactly the right spot, because if we don't, we will find that we've potentially got them upside down or around the wrong way or something. We know we've got the right two rows, but just want to make sure that they are all matched up. So always check twice, sew once. Doesn't always work, but it's a great theory to have. So what we're going to do is we're going to go right sides together, and what I do is, when I can find my pins, this is where I do pin. So I grab my pins and I'll go along and I'll actually nest all of those seams first. So where we've done the log cabin, where we've joined two log cabins together, I'll go in and pop a pin, and I'll just go the whole way along the quilt, matching the top of the quilt and then feeling that connection right in there so that we can then pop a pin in. I always pin it back from my edges, and the reason I do that is so I can sew down without having to take them out, and then I take them out after. Lots of people do lots of different ways, and I think every way is just perfect and it's what you feel most comfortable with. And so as we just move through the quilt, we're just putting those together, nesting those seams, and this is just going to make sure that we get those connections really snug, the quilt stays nice and straight. So you'll see that as we're pulling the quilt across to do each one, they're pretty well lined up already, and all we're doing is just snuggling it in nicely so that then we can go ahead and sew this row together. So I'm going to go ahead, this is the last one. Actually, there's one other thing I want to share with you just before we do that. Let's just pop this last one in. The other thing that I do when I'm piecing my rows together is this here. I will make sure that this is at a nice right angle here, and then I just pop a pin in the end. And then I'll do exactly the same. Let's skedaddle across to the other end. Pop that in. Make sure we've got a lovely right angle and pop that one in. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to sew this one together. I'm then going to sew the next 2 rows together. So I'm going to sew in each one in rows of 2. And once I've done all the 2s, then I'm going to do the bottom 2 together, top 2 together, and then I'll join through the middle. It does get quite bulky because this is an extremely big quilt, and there might be other ways that you can think of that make it easier. Do what you naturally prefer to do when you're sewing together these big quilts, but she is going to look just stunning when we put her finish piecing all the rows together. So I'm going to go ahead and put all the rows together, and I'm going to pop back. Okay, so I've just finished piecing together the quilt. I'm just going to place a photo up here. I've had to pop it over the top of the balcony because it's currently measuring at 98 by 98, so it's a pretty big quilt, but I absolutely love it, and I love how the heart just shadows out, and it just really has come together quite nicely. So what I'm going to do is, because I want to frame the quilt, I'm going to add in a border, a 2.5 inch border. So I'm going to use this fabric here. We'll just pop that up nice and close, from the same range, from Lighthearted, Camille Roskelley. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and quilt it. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that turns out. I've just bought a new pattern from nope, can't remember. I'll pop a note on here when I'm putting this up, and so I'm really looking forward to giving that particular pattern a go on this quilt. And then I'm just going to finish off and border with this lovely little red heart fabric. So just pop that one up there. So that lovely red heart fabric. So I'll then go on border. Once I've done all of that, I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you the finished product, but I'm super excited with this quilt and really looking forward to seeing how it turns out. I'll be back soon. Okay, so we have the quilt loaded onto the Gamble Classic Plus, and she's working away. We've done 4 rows already, so we're on to the 5th, and it's turning out to be just beautiful. So we're just going to focus in on the pattern and have a little look at that. So if we just focus down here, you'll see that we're using it's a stripe with a heart embedded into it, and I think given that we're using the log cabin block, that this is quite fitting. So we've got the combination of stripes and hearts, which is the same as what our log cabin block is. This is the biggest quilt that I have loaded onto the machine so far. I did need to join some batting to be able to load to get this one big enough. So she's certainly quite big at 102 inches by 102 inches. That's certainly a nice size quilt for the winter. So let's just lie back here. But she's just going very, very well. I think we've got another couple of hours of stitching, and we'll be able to then bind the quilt, and I'll be able to show you the finished product. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this tutorial. I hope that you love this quilt as much as I do, and I hope you take the opportunity to give it a go. The mud map is a great one. Go back to it, take a photo of it, and you'll be able to create it from there. I'll pop the mud map back up again so that you can take another photo, you know, just a couple of things. Just make sure you look at those log cabins, the blocks individually, because some of them you'll see the way they're orientated, they do have like a white strip. So you've got the half blocks. They're pretty straightforward. The full blocks, great. But there are a few blocks where you just have to make sure your rotation is correct, because you want the white on the outside of the inner heart just to give it that balance across the entire quilt. But I am super excited with this quilt. I've loved making it, and I really do hope you do as well. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, it'd be awesome if you could subscribe or like this video. That just gives me an idea of whether I create more content like this or I look at something, you know, a little bit different. But I love bringing this to you, and I do hope you have a wonderful day. Keep crafting, and bye for now.